those people through our own food assistance, and that's providing direct rations, and with the hope that we'll be able to pull many of those people away from the brink. But it needs to be done in not in isolation, because many of those people are in critical conditions where nutrition is problematic, and where health situation is certainly compounding those problems of malnutrition. So this is the reason why we need to have an integrated response to this crisis. And then hopefully we'll be able to enable people to get back into their homes and enable them to start working the fields. But that in itself is another huge challenge, but maybe I should stop speaking and give somebody else a chance to ask a question.
My name is Hamza Habib, I'm from Bulletins. So I just want to know, as far as the capacity of the provincial government is concerned, there are a lot of concerns over the transparency of the disbursement of aid. If the aid goes through the provincial government, then there are a lot of issues. People raise a lot of concerns that the element of corruption will emerge. So in this regard, I just want to know, first of all, that UN disbursed its aid through its own network, or it will provide these funds to the provincial government. The other thing I want to know, that the capacity issue also exists in the provincial governments. They don't know. There are people say that they couldn't anticipate how much the flood can damage, and they didn't evacuate the reservoir, the Amanha Dam, and the whole lakes. There are two lakes which are Amancha Lake, and if they couldn't foresee that how much impact it will create with flood, if the reservoir will be, if they emptied the reservoirs, the magnitude of the loss will not be that disastrous.
I think everybody's aware of the issue of transparency. Unfortunately, it is an issue which has beset many aspects of governance in this country over the years. Would hope that that understanding of just how destructive any kind of graft can be has been heard by those people in positions of authority, at whatever level, whether it's at district or province or even at federal, and I've realised that it's really not in the interests of the people of Pakistan. Now, so there's a kind of hope and an expectation that, as a result, again, thank you very much to the a dynamic press corps, that you're asking those questions. I think more and more people are beginning to receive and understand those issues, through their phones, and there's less and less tolerance for that kind of behaviour. We know that it will continue to go on in parts, but transparency of information that we're beginning to see more and more, hopefully will push that away. As far as the UN is concerned, we all work through implementing partners. We all have control and very strict issues of accountability in terms of how our funds are spent, and obviously on what material it is that we have spent on and where that material goes. The reputational risk for us, particularly as I can speak from my own organisation, if food assistance is going awry, is extremely high. So we're very, very strict and strong on that, both with our own partners as well as actually internally, of course. Yeah.
Just want to add one thing. Whether do you think they need a system where they can foresee if the disaster can
Yeah, let me come to that question. Yeah, the second part of your question, which is around early warning. Look, I think you need to compare and understand the magnitude of this flood, the nature of the way that the flood water came down, and the numbers of people who died, versus what we saw in 2010. Okay, if you compare the number of people who died relative to the magnitude, the ferocity, the violence of some of these deluges and the flash flooding, actually the numbers of people who died could have been much, much worse had it not been for good early warning. So I think that, of course, loss of life is tragic, and we should do everything to continue to reduce that. But like I said, I think when you look at what we've experienced over the course of the summer, and it wasn't just a one-off event, remember. And remember what happened in Balochistan in August. So it wasn't just that sort of the last phase of the monsoon. Raining in places and the monsoon falling in places which, it very rarely falls, and with such ferocity. And yet the numbers of people who were killed, they were able to manage to some extent to mitigate the worst and get people out of the way. Animals, not quite so much, sadly. But yeah.
Hi, Saeed Shah from Wall Street Journal. I want to ask, the more current appeal, I appreciate, is for life-saving needs. The government of Pakistan is talking about a longer-term program of rebuilding, rehabilitation, and put a cost of $30–40 billion on that. Does that mean that the UN is likely to make another appeal some months down the line for a much bigger sum of money to meet those longer-term needs? And secondly, today, will we get a figure for the pledges that come in that we can measure against this 816 that we're all seeking?
Yeah. The longer-term issues have very much now been spoken about and discussed, and rightly so, because the impact, whilst today we're focusing on the immediacy, we certainly need to be looking at the long term. And, the long term requires a whole variety of issues associated with understanding some of the structural inequalities that exist in society, as much as the inadequacy of building regulations, or the way that certain policies have been affected, in a number of different areas, which, if they had been maybe followed more effectively, we might not have seen quite so much damage, and we might be in a little bit of a better situation. It's retrospective, so it's not necessarily very helpful. What I'm getting at here, though, is that we have an opportunity for sure. And the phrase "build back better," is maybe overused. But building back better isn't just about infrastructure. It's not just about building back houses better. It can be about building back maybe some of the sort of socioeconomic and societal structures, the way that food is managed, the way that the health system works and can be more and better coordinated. There's a whole variety of different issues which can be looked at. Now, at the moment, the focus is through a thing called the Post-Disaster Needs Assessment exercise. It's a standard exercise which is managed by the World Bank, supported by UNDP on the UN side, but has very much the engagement of the government as well. That PDNA, the Post-Disaster Needs Assessment, is being undertaken at the moment, and the expectation is that we should start getting results towards the middle of this month. And that could and may well be used as a platform for a reconstruction conference, which is being considered at the moment. I have no further details, but certainly in answer to your question, we're very much looking forward into that space right now, and understanding not only, of course, the immediacy, but understanding how the immediacy can be used as a platform to go into that later stages of full recovery and rehabilitation. Pledges to date. Well, pledges to date, we'll see, what we'll hear, I think, during the course of the event in Geneva. Hopefully, we'll have member states in the room in Geneva making statements about how much money they're putting forward in response to the appeal. Hopefully. it doesn't always happen because they haven't had a huge amount of time actually to review the document. Some have, I think, already made some indication that they will be making statements today, but you know, I'm as excited and as interested as you are, you know, to listen to those types of statements from member states.
I just want to know, what about the pledges made against the old appeal, against $160 million? When it comes to the fresh appeal, will that 85 million will be separated and the new pledges will be made, or that will be included in that? Number one. And secondly, how can you compare this disaster to other disasters? I know the response and plenty of other things are there, but I just want to know the magnitude of this disaster. Can we compare it with tsunami, or can we compare it with Ukraine war when it comes to the destruction and number of effectees and the problem they are facing? Thank you.
Let me just try answering those two. The flash appeal that was, I mean, what we're looking at here with the new appeal is an update. Okay, so it encompasses the 160 or so that was included. Yeah? And it will encompass the contributions that have been received against that. So I hope that's clear. Can we compare? Yeah. Yes, we can from the point of view of an understanding of the humanitarian need. We can compare because we use standards as a UN family to understand the criticality of human need. So whether it's in food security, whether it's around malnutrition, you know, there are benchmarks that we use to define whether or not we're in an emergency situation requiring humanitarian assistance. I described earlier the IPC, the Integrated Phase Classification System, which determines the levels of food insecurity that need an emergency response. So in the health sector, in the nutrition center, we have the same thing. So that enables us to compare like with like, you know, whether it's in Somalia, whether it's in Ukraine, and so on and so forth. And it's very much based on the concept of that's right behind all of this work, which is equity, humanitarian principles. So and I don't need to go into describing what humanitarian principles are, I hope. But it is obviously on the basis of equity, right? So the comparison can be made, for sure. And this is where, you know, my colleagues from OCHA are so valuable, because they're the ones that coalesce and coordinate us in every emergency around the world, and are able to provide us with that comparison. And will flag up the fact that certain emergencies are not necessarily getting the due response. So, you know, why is it that the world is prioritizing the needs of people in Somalia over the needs of the people in Mali, for example? Okay, so you know those types of issues are very, very prevalent, and like I said, it's through the humanitarian system, as led by and facilitated, coordinated by OCHA, that enables us to do that.
Okay, can I add something, please? Yes, I think in terms of comparison, sometimes we need to be a bit careful because emergencies come differently. Maybe in terms of the scale, you may say, okay, the floods, so these floods in terms of scale were more than the floods of 2010. But then when you begin to compare the overall impact, I think that comes also differently. I mean, an emergency with a big scale in a country that has good capacity may not have that big, you know, effect on communities, and the response will be great, the resources will be there, and you may not have, you know, people suffering a lot compared to an emergency that may not be to that scale, but in a country with, you know, less capacity to respond, and so the impact will really be good. So comparing emergencies can be a bit problematic, you know. We need to look at a number of elements. We need to look at scale. We need to look at capacity of countries, you know, early warning mechanisms. Perhaps in 2022, Pakistan is at another level in terms of capacity, early warning, predictions, and rescue preparedness compared to 2010. So it makes comparison a bit problematic. Thank you.
First time and then up.
So I'm Faisal Raza Khan. I'm from 92 Views. My question is to you, in fact, a couple of one. Number one is that whether in this appeal of 1816, the most vulnerable group, women, especially the pregnant women, and the children who are suffering a lot, and especially when we are talking about the stunting and then afterwards malnutrition, and now a couple of the thing is that now they are suffering from the different kinds of diseases, and that is actually coupling the disaster. So how this appeal is catering those vulnerable groups, number one. And the second is that most important aspect of this whole disaster, that majority from the catastrophe area, they are migrated to the different cities where the life is pretty settled. Unfortunately, they are begging at the roads because they don't have any means to survive and don't have any livelihood. And then afterwards they are ending up into a very bad shape. So whether any assessment by the UN agencies done in this regard, or the government organizations, and they have taken you in confidence, how those groups who are already migrated from the disaster area, how they are going to be catered and how they are going to be assisted regarding health, malnutrition, and all other aspects.
Really good questions. Really good questions.
I just want to add one point. Even the incidents of theft and robbery have been substantially increasing, especially in areas like Karachi. So people now mug frequently on the streets. Then these incidents also are linked to the floods because people are desperate.
Yeah. Yeah. Look, I think every unfortunate circumstance, disaster like this, brings with it some real problems. And we have it as an embedded part of everything that we do as a humanitarian assistance community, concerns over issues of protection, and protection for the most vulnerable. And the focus is always on minorities, the focus is always on women, and the focus is always on children. Sorry, gentlemen, but that's a fact, and I think that's understood. In terms of the health and nutrition of women and children, I tried to convey that in my opening remarks, just about how serious the situation is right now for women and children. It's absolutely acknowledged. Like I said, I witnessed it over the weekend. And the loss of dignity, particularly that women have, living under a blanket propped up by bamboo. No dignity at all. And that's a real problem. And so we're well aware as humanitarians, really concerned to be able to help address that situation, particularly. And of course, pregnant women and infants are the most important when it comes to ensuring that they get the requisite nutrition. We know that this country has a real problem when it comes to nutrition across the board, 40% plus stunting. It's serving as an anchor, behind the boat. Pakistan just simply will not progress as a country unless you address that stunting problem. Too many children are not getting the nutrients at an early enough age that will enable them to learn at school, and they will not become productive members of society. So you have to address the issue of stunting in this country. And what we're seeing, of course, with situations like this is just exacerbating that problem, accentuating that problem. I witnessed it, again, I'm sorry, I keep going back to my Sunday, but, where, you know, there's women there who can't breastfeed anymore. They don't have milk. They don't have the nutrients and the clean water to be able to provide. So this is the reason why right now we're into that second wave of the human, I mean the disaster on human life potentially, unless we address those issues of health and nutrition. On the issues of migration, we asked that question to a number of people over the weekend, and the answer was that we don't want to go. All we want to do is to go back to our houses. We're not migrating. We want to go back to our houses. That's where we will get our dignity back. So, you know, of course, those people who have made a decision to go into the city thinking that that might provide them with a better opportunity are often going to fall foul of you know, and find the reality is very different, and have to resort to begging or any other you know, type of antisocial behaviour. I mean, that's unfortunate. We see that all over the world in these types of situations, and we have to mitigate against that. We have to work hard to encourage people not to make those types of decisions. You know, I think again, as somebody who is a foreigner to Pakistan, the thing that always is so impressive is just the societal generosity. You don't see it in every country around the world, but by golly, in Pakistan, and I've seen it in Afghanistan too, I mean, the willingness of communities to share and to support each other is extraordinary. And one hopes that fabric will sustain as best as possible, you know, until they receive the requisite support, either from government or from us, that will get them back up on their feet and have sustainable livelihoods. But they're really important questions and really significant issues, I think, that we're very, very conscious of. So thank you for asking them.
Just any final questions, or we can wrap up? The one final question.
Thank you, ma'am. I'm Farhan Mukhani from Financial Times. Just want to follow up on the phrase that you just used, societal generosity. Pakistan has seen a very large increase in the number of non-profits over the past 2 to 3 decades.
Yeah.
And yet these non-profits are struggling today in spite of the floods because of tighter regulations that have been imposed in the last decade especially. We've seen a number of organizations complaining about this. Now recently the international non-profits have been given some relaxation, but this is only for 6 months. And many of them are not even certain if they can set up regular offices because this is a relatively short window. So have you taken up this matter with the government? How major do you think this is an impediment in dealing with the challenge that you're talking about? Thank you.
I wish I could provide you with a substantive answer to that question, but Sarah, I'm afraid I can't, because I simply don't know. I'm conscious of the issue, but I'm conscious of the issue because I've read about it. I have not been close enough to understand just how many organizations are out there who are struggling to get registration or whatever a kind of structure or setup they need in order to operate. So I'm not really very much...
More for the government.
It is a question more for the government, I'm afraid. I wish I could be more helpful.
Have you discussed it with the government?
We have. It has certainly come up, at least in the context of international organisations, that are, and we do have a coordination forum where some of these issues percolate up through the humanitarian country team, you know, I'm the acting humanitarian coordinator, so I should know everything that the real humanitarian coordinator knows. On this issue, I don't. And I sense that Julian would probably be in a better position to give you that detail. So apologies, but...
Yep, but maybe I can make just one comment on that one. I know also we have strong NGO networks here. We have the National Humanitarian Network. It's a network that brings the national organizations, and then the PHS, the Pakistani Humanitarian Forum, that brings together the INGOs. And I know that they have also been engaging a lot with the National Flood Response and Coordination Center. And the government actually has been very open to discuss, challenges, and they have actually relaxed a number of restrictions that were in place, just to improve the operational environment for the NGOs. But as you mentioned, I think there are issues that maybe need to be handled. I mean, as we move on, even beyond the flood response issues that existed before, to ensure that the environment of national organizations, is more conducive for them to operate.
Can I just say, just in closing, before you completely shut it down, once again, I want to say what I said at the beginning, which is to say thank you, because the work that you do, as I mentioned before, I think is so important, and we really, really appreciate it, as I say, your ability to be able to capture what we're trying to convey, and to ensure that the world is aware of what we're trying to do to help the people of Pakistan. So.
शुक्रिया बहुत बहुत। बस आपसे इल्तिजा यही है कि जो हम यहाँ बात करते हैं हमारी आवाज़ बने, पाकिस्तान के लोगों की आवाज़ बने, और ये जो फ्लैश पीस में हम मालूमात दे रहे हैं, नंबर्स दे रहे हैं, जो हमारी आस्क है, अगर इसी को उठाएंगे आप, तो हो सकता है हम उम्मीद करते हैं कि वो ममालिक इसको देखकर उनको कुछ एहसास हो गया कि वाकई ज़रूरत है। दूर बैठ के ये पता करना या महसूस करना या इसका एहसास रखना कि कहीं और किसी गांव में, हमें यहाँ शहर में रहकर कहीं और नहीं उस तरह पता चलता, और हमें उसी तरह पता चलता है जब हम टीवी पे देखते हैं, रेडियो पे सुनते हैं, अखबार में पढ़ते हैं या सोशल मीडिया पे हम देखते हैं। तो यही हमारी गुजारिश है आपसे कि जितना आप इन कहानियों को, इन लोगों की आवाज़ को उठाएंगे, उतना ही लोग देखकर उनको शायद इस बात का एहसास होगा कि वाकई ज़रूरत है, और वो फिर मुड़ के मदद करेंगे। और ये ना सिर्फ इंटरनेशनल कम्युनिटी के लिए, बट जैसे कि किसने कहा कि हम खुद भी बहुत काम करते हैं, लोगों की मदद करते हैं, तो इससे भी एक जज्बा पैदा होता है कि वाकई हमें मदद करते रहना चाहिए। तो आपका जो रोल है इसमें वो बहुत अहम है, और गुजारिश यही है कि इसको आवाज़ को ज़रा सी ऊँची कर दें। शुक्रिया।
Shukriya. Thanks.
Thank you so much. That's wonderful.
Is it?
Oh, yes.
Thanks. Yeah, I do. Yeah. Okay. Come round. Okay. Very good.